Hello, everyone. We are your first group to present, and we're going to be presenting the article, How Teachers Experience Principal Leadership, the Roles of Professional Community, Trust, Efficacy, and Shared Responsibility. This is written by Kala A. Wallstrom and Karen Seashore Lewis. This is a quantitative study, and the presenters for this slide will be Jonathan Kabir, who will be saying the purpose, the literature review, and who will be giving emphasis on Chapter 3. Myself, Jessica Bailey, I will be doing the summary findings as well as some emphasis on Chapter 3. And we have Alicia Farley, who will be saying the conclusion and also giving emphasis on Chapter 3. We are now about to start with slide 2 with Jonathan.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Kabir. I will be discussing the purpose and the summary of the literature review for our article, How Teachers Experience Principal Leadership. Slide 2, I'm sorry. The purpose of this article was to study a myriad of factors that often exist in a principal-teacher interaction and teacher-teacher relationships to determine how they correlate with teachers' instructional practices. Slide 3. The literature review focused on 4 to 5 variables that may or may not contribute to the school's climate and culture. Some of these variables include shared leadership, which can be described as a teacher's influence and participation in school-wide decisions. Slide 4. Trust. The study indicates that trust is a significant predictor for a risk-taking behavior. Slide 5. Efficacy. The ability to produce a desired or intended result. The researcher concentrated on the relationship between collective efficacy and student achievement. Slide 6. A professional community is comprised of a shared value, support, a common focus on student learning, and a collaborative work. Teachers adopt pedagogical approaches that enhance the student learning opportunities. Slide 7. In summary, the literature review suggests that leadership practices that share power are credited with creating greater motivation, increased trust, and risk-taking, and building a sense of community and efficacy amongst its members. The following slide demonstrates the framework for analysis carried out in this article. Slide 9. This framework guides us in our examination of how teachers experience the leadership effects of principal as it relates to instruction. The principal-teacher relationship are indirect by trust and shared leadership, while the teacher-teacher relationships are indicated by professional learning communities and collective responsibility. We will now direct our attention to Jessica, who will discuss the summary of finding. Jessica.
Okay, I'm on slide 11. The summary of findings. The investigation was stimulated by 3 variables. The first was the principal leadership, the second, teacher-teacher relationship, and the third one, individual sense of efficacy. And I'm going to be stating these findings within the next few slides. The first is principal leadership, and now I'm on slide 12. Principal leadership. The findings indicate the effects of principal leadership on instruction are weak in the areas of standard contemporary practice and flexible grouping. Administrators should expand the decision-making process to include non-administrators in the school setting. Slide 13. And the different levels of education, In the different levels of education, different levels of behaviors may be more important in one setting than another. In principal-teacher trust, more important in middle schools when the dependent variable is focused on instruction. And we have shared leadership, which where you will see that it is more important within high school settings. Slide 14. In teacher-teacher relationships, the 3 instructional practice variables that were studied show that professional developments add a great enhancement. Not all teacher behaviors have the same effect on instruction. The 3 variables we're going to be looking at will be the reflective dialogue, focused instruction, and deprivatized practice. Slide 15. Reflective dialogue. Teachers have opportunities to discuss practices with other teachers about standard contemporary practice, and you can see that when teachers have professional developments once a month, or whether it's at school when teachers are able to discuss practices within their classrooms. The next one is the focused instruction. When teachers agree on effective pedagogy, there are questions about how to eliminate activities that could distract students from concentrating. And the last is deprivatized practice. This gives teachers the opportunity to see how teachers use flexible grouping. Slide 16. Individual characteristics in instruction. The characteristics of an individual with the expectation of the race have an impact on instructional practice. When the context includes the expectation of the teacher, it is paramount on their confidential knowledge. The standard contemporary practice are familiar to all teachers, and gender roles and experience requires more classroom observations. Okay, next we are on our next slide, which as it relates to chapter 3.
Yes. We believe that our researchers, Wallstrom and Lewis, were participatory action researchers where multiple parties or stakeholders with an interest in the research of topic and project must work together as a research team in conducting the action research study. As a reflective practitioners, we have to be willing to become lifelong learners. This action research cycle allows you to enter at any point and repeat as often if you like, observe, reflect, and plan.
Okay, and to also add emphasis on chapter 3, the title of chapter 3 was How to Review the Literature and Develop Research Questions. And in the article, you can see how they had the literature review, which was stated by Jonathan. And you also have to make sure that to identify a research problem, you need to develop an inquisitive attitude and ask questions, which includes our hypothesis, which Alicia is going to elaborate more on.
Okay, when we are referring to hypothesis, we're talking about the formal statement of the researcher's prediction of the relationship that exists among the variables under investigation. It was stated earlier that this study was a quantitative study, and with a quantitative study, you often have a hypothesis. And when I began discussing the conclusion section of this article, you will hear the hypothesis that the researchers make about this study. All right, for the conclusion section, I will begin talking about the study's limitations. There were 3 limitations. The first limitation has to do with surveys, and it says that surveys are only a proximate measure of our key dependent variable, which is instructional practice. The second limitation is actual principal behaviors were not measured, but only teachers' perceptions of how their principals behave. The third limitation is the article was limited to analysis of individual teacher responses. Going to the next slide. The conclusion focused on 3 variables. These variables were trust, shared leadership, and professional community. Next slide. When we're talking about the variable trust, I'm going to start with the authors Wallstrom and Lewis hypothesis. Their hypothesis was that trust would be an important feature of school improvement and student achievement in elementary, middle, and high school. Next slide. The findings of this study revealed that trust was less important than what was originally anticipated. It was a significant predictor in only the regression of focused instruction on the middle school. Next slide. Wallstrom and Lewis's reaction to the study findings were that they were surprised due to the fact that their measure of trust included items that measured the principal's role in providing both direct and indirect support for instruction. Next slide. Trust in the principal's instructional support seems to reflect a passive rather than an active form of leadership. Work on trust implies creating trust among teachers, which happens within professional communities, may be more significant in stimulating changes in practice than does having a trusting relationship with the principal. Next slide. Now I'm going to talk about the second variable. The second variable is shared leadership, and it emerged as somewhat more important in determining instructional practice. Decision making should be shared between the principal and the teachers. It creates legitimacy for collective decisions about instructional priorities. Shared leadership also reinforces norms of professional community, binding teachers together in the strategic decision that teachers face when they design and adjust their classroom practice. Next slide. And as far as the findings for the variable shared leadership, it said that when the power differential between principals and teachers is lessened, instruction is positively affected. Wallstrom and Lewis findings suggest that when teachers are involved in making decisions that affect them, they tend to strengthen or deepen their instructional practice. When instructional leadership is shared among the teachers and with the principal, the influence of the combined efforts on the quality of pedagogy is significant. Next slide. And the last variable, which is professional community, is centered on the sharing of teacher knowledge about practice rather than on decision making. The professional community is strong when teachers share ideas about instructional practice. They discuss those ideas as well as demonstrate those ideas through instructional practice regularly amongst each other. Next slide. The teachers develop a relationship amongst each other, and this relationship results in them depending upon one another, which they depend less on the principal for his or her expert ideas or knowledge. And when the teachers depend upon each other, this diminishes trust amongst them and their principal. Next slide. The principal is only looked to for help when the professional community is weak. In conclusion, even though principals are not needed when the professional community is strong, does not suggest that principals are not important. It suggests that their work in schools may be one of quiet support rather than bold, visibly transformational action. Next slide. These findings create a clearer picture of teacher-principal and teacher-teacher interactions that support learning and bring us closer to the elusive goal of clarifying the link between leadership and learning.
All right. But next slide. These are our references that we have, and this is the end of our presentation. We hope that you have enjoyed it and that you have learned something from it. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.